This is ESPN ESPORTS. I'm Arda Ocal. BlizzCon 2019 has come and gone, and it certainly was a landmark weekend for Blizzard esports. Barriers were shattered, history was made, definitely in the Overwatch World Cup. For the first time in its 4-year history, South Korea were on the outside looking in, as Team USA, led by regular season MVP Sinatra, defeated every single team and only conceded a minimal amount of maps en route to the World Championship. And believe me when I tell you, this was no fluke. And now we bring in our ESPN eSports insider, Jacob Wolf, to break it all down. Team USA victorious, and we saw some great performances. You would expect that, of course, from the likes of Sinatra. But how about Space? How about Corey? I mean, we saw some breakout performances here.
Yeah, I mean, Corey was the one that I think didn't get as much love coming into this, right? Like, a lot of people assumed that they were going to play KSF, and they ended up playing Corey for the entirety of Saturday, and, like, he was getting chants. Even during Sinatra's, like, MVP crowning, people were chanting Corey, and so I think that, like, Corey performed very well. I think Space is sort of, like, one of the unsung heroes of North American Overwatch. Like, I think he's great. Like, I've thought he's great for a while. The Valiant have had hit or miss this season versus last, and so, you know, and now he's moving to the Gladiators, so hopefully we'll see a team that's built around him that's a little bit more competitive. But yeah, I mean, Corey was really the surprise of the weekend for me. He played really, really well, and I'm hoping that he can play like that on the Washington Justice this next year, because I mean, he was impressive. I do just want to point out something. One of my criticisms of him from this weekend is that there were certain points where he, on certain roles, where he kind of felt like lost. So, like, I thought Corey played really well, and I do think the argument for him to potentially be the MVP of the tournament is fair, but I do think that he seemed a little lost. That's the difference between him and Space. If the MVP was not fan voted as it was, Space would have been my MVP because he played really, really well. You mentioned Sigma earlier. That's something that I think he had a great weekend on.
He had never played Sigma in Overwatch League. I find that fascinating.
Yeah,
Space can pick up a hero like that and play it so well at that level in a tournament like this.
He's incredibly talented. You know, I think that he's somebody who really came into his own at the end of the Overwatch League this year, despite his team not being so great. So it was good to see him perform that way. But Space knew where he needed to be every single time. There was rarely a chance. If he was out of position, it was because the team made the wrong call, is what it seemed like. Corey kind of roamed a little bit aimlessly in certain parts of the play throughout, particularly the South Korea and the China series. But I think that generally, Space had a stellar weekend.
Someone else who had a stellar weekend was Super. Of course, he is one of the 3 players on Team USA who is now an Overwatch League champion and Overwatch World Cup champion, of course, playing with the San Francisco Shock. Interesting question you asked him, Jacob, at the championship press conference about the gap, South Korea versus America and the rest of the world. Here's what he had to say about it.
And I still feel like probably as a whole, South Korea probably is the superior region. I mean, we kind of saw that with Gauntlet too. Like Atlanta Academy kind of starting to close that gap as like the best team in North American contenders, going all the way to the finals and losing to Element Mystic. But I think the gap is still closing, but it's still apparent, I would say.
So it's almost like a preparation meets motivation kind of thing, because it's a good point there. I mean, it's still over 50% of the league being South Korean players. But Team USA, it's not like they didn't deserve to win this tournament, but there were other factors than just being a talented team on paper.
Yeah, I mean, there was cohesion there that existed because of the San Francisco Shock players, and also they had existing relationships with a lot of these other players like KSF and Raucus who played throughout the weekend. I think that generally, to Super's point, that there's a culture in South Korea that doesn't exactly exist in the United States. We've seen it kind of become more of a thing in Europe and esports as well, but in South Korea this is taken so seriously, right? It is one of their major sports, and I think that these players take it incredibly seriously throughout their entire life. They are raised like this in the early team houses in Overwatch, pre-Overwatch League, when they were playing in Apex and other things. It is a very serious thing. It is not necessarily the case in America. This team, though, seemed like that, you know, they were very jovial and kind of had a lot of fun, but also they seemed like they were very locked in from the very beginning. I mean, that's what Sinatra told you a few weeks ago. They seemed very much in it. And I think that was the big difference this year. This wasn't a side tournament for Overwatch for the players on Team USA. This mattered, which is good.
And I wonder how we will look at this year in the future, particularly how South Korea will bounce back. First, let's talk about what went wrong for South Korea in this tournament. Was it simply because on paper they still had the most powerful team going into the Overwatch World Cup? Anyone would admit that. Maybe their motivation wasn't as high as Team USA. Maybe there was a lack of preparation and scrimming before the tournament. But in your opinion, after having watched them in the tournament, what do you think happened?
I mean, I was very underwhelmed by Haxall this weekend. I mean, he was Rookie of the Year, and he made some great plays here and there, but he wasn't what we saw on the Vancouver Titans. And I'm wondering if that's a lack of cohesion among this team, and sort of, a lot of these players probably only played together the last few months, right? Whereas some of the other teams, I mean, we saw Team China, almost all of them were Shang 200 players, right? And then we saw with Team US, 3 of them were the shock players. Half the roster, the active roster, were shock players. So I think there was a little bit of lack of cohesion and familiarity with playing each other. I think that showed out. They had some really close matches, South Korea did, and the U.S. beat them also in the group stage. And so I think that cohesion was a big part of this Overwatch World Cup this weekend. Something sort of that I thought South Korea did well. Carpe played pretty well. I think he showed why he's one of the highest players or paid players in the league now, why he was such a valuable free agent this offseason and ended up signing the 3-year deal with Fusion. But I do think that they didn't seem like a unit on Team South Korea this year. In previous years when members were all from the same team or close to all from the same team. And so there's no lack of talent of South Korean players in the league. That's why that stat is so high of number of players that are in the Overwatch League that are from South Korea. But I think generally they didn't seem like they were put together as a unit.
France also had a strong showing against South Korea at this Overwatch World Cup as well. But now let's talk about what happens next, because you made a very good point that this is so important in the culture of South Korea, esports being among their top concerns. Let's use StarCraft as an example. Last year, for the first time ever, a non-South Korean player, Cyril, wins the championship. And then what we saw afterwards was almost a banding together of South Korean players, iron sharpening iron there to make sure that the championship comes back. And Dark mentioned that when he won the championship this year at BlizzCon. And I wonder if the same thing is going to happen here. What will a supremely motivated South Korean team look like?
Yeah, I mean, we've got 2 options here, right? We've seen in League of Legends, there's not a South Korean, but for 2 years in a row now, there's not a South Korean team in the final, right? There's a Chinese team and a European team here shortly. And so we've seen, I don't know if it's a question of the region. That's why I asked Super the question in the press conference is, are the other regions just getting better, significantly better? And his answer was, no, there's still a pretty big gap and it's still pretty apparent. We just happen to be the best American team to ever play in the World Cup, right? So I could see them sort of in roster building, right? The way that they build the rosters for each national team in the World Cup next year. Maybe the roster building is, hey, we want to pluck a bunch of players from NYXL or Vancouver Titans, just to kind of make up for these guys play together all season. They get it. Overwatch is a trusting game. You gotta, if you're a DPS and you're running in there and you're trying to fire on somebody, you've got to know that the healer's behind you, ready to heal you up so you don't die, right? And so I think that cohesion does matter a lot. Maybe that's taken into more consideration next year for the building of Team South Korea. Or we could see the League of Legends model where it's just, they will be a medal team again, but they won't be the best team there. And really, I think the jury's out on that one.
Well, the team that met their expectation was Team USA. Fans very happy after this one for the first time ever. Team USA are your Overwatch World Cup champions. Let us know in the comments below what you thought of the 2019 Overwatch World Cup, whether you were entertained, whether you thought it was a success. Did America deserve to win? How great was their performance in Overwatch World Cup history? And also subscribe and ring that bell so you get notifications every time videos like these drop on our channel. And of course, continued coverage available at espn.com/esports.